So, so now that we've covered all of that, we need to look at the divisions of the autonomic nervous system, where I said you could be assessed in a bit more detail. So we've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So the sympathetic nervous system is when we're exposed to some kind of stressor or fear in our environment. And this is also commonly known as the fight, flight, or freeze response. What does it do? Well, it increases the activity of most of the body's muscles, organs, and glands. So the way you can remember the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic, because they are opposites, we said one is dominant in our body at all times. Well, sympathetic stimulates our body, and parasympathetic decreases the activity of our body. So you can associate it with peace. So sort of, if all of you guys watching the lecture as well as myself delivering the lecture, right now our parasympathetic nervous system would be dominant because there is no stressor and we're more so in a state of peace. So one increases activity and one decreases activity, okay? So we said there needs to be a stressor or a fear stimulus of some kind to trigger our sympathetic nervous system. Seeing something that scares us, being really stressed because you're about to go into a SAC or exam. How does the sympathetic nervous system achieve this? How does this happen within the autonomic system? Well, hormones like adrenaline are released from adrenal glands within our body. And the heart rate and breathing rate increasing is probably the main things we can associate with that increased activity. But if we look at it in more detail, you really need to know each of these roles and the difference, not to intimidate you. But for example, some questions in psych are trying to trick students by, for example, asking about the pupil's sympathetic versus parasympathetic response as a multiple choice question. But of course, if our sympathetic nervous system is activated and the activity in our body is increased due to stress, our pupils would dilate. Because when our pupils dilate, we actually allow more light to enter the eye and we can see more. Okay, so our saliva as well is decreased because it's viewed as non-essential. Instead, we're trying to maintain essential functions to aid in fight, flight, freeze. Lungs would expand to increase that breathing rate. The heart rate would increase, as we said. The stomach would decrease contractions, so digest less food because currently it is not the priority. When under stress, intestines would also decrease contractions to reduce digestion. We would have less release of bile via our gallbladder, again, because we don't care about digestion at the moment. The liver would increase the release of blood glucose to quickly release more energy to aid in that fight, flight, freeze. So although we're not digesting food, we're just aiming to release all of our glucagon supply, release as much glucose as possible so that we have more energy, such as to run away from the scary threat that is facing us. Adrenal glands are stimulated to release adrenaline, which, is responsible for this response, this whole sympathetic response, and the bladder would be relaxed. Okay? So when you're in stress, when you're really, really stressed, maybe you can relate this to an experience that you've had. You won't feel hungry, you won't feel thirsty, you won't have to go to the toilet. And all of a sudden, when the stress goes away, such as you've sat the test and you're finally letting go of that stress, you need to go to the toilet, you feel hungry, etc., etc. So maybe you can relate that to a response that you've had, but it really does all make sense. Now, when we're talking about the parasympathetic, we said it's decreased activity of most of our body. Of course, adrenaline release is inhibited. There is less adrenaline being released from the adrenal glands and going round and round because we're trying to relax the body, not prepare it for action and running away. So after the threat is passed, our body's calmed. And the parasympathetic nervous system, of course, will be active most of our time, because you shouldn't be feeling stress every day. The dangers of your sympathetic nervous system being constantly activated would be those things like burnout during year 12, all of a sudden getting sick just because your immune system is weak. So the parasympathetic nervous system is active most of the time and should be in a normal, healthy person. But it takes longer to return the body to a normal parasympathetic state because all of these hormones and adrenaline and cortisol need to be removed from the bloodstream first. It's not going to happen immediately. So once you've experienced that really stressful situation, notice it takes you some time to actually calm down until you finally feel calm. It doesn't happen straight away. You might still experience the stress as it subsides slowly. So it's all the opposite. I recommend having a table like this in your notes in general. All of these slides are really good for as a note for psych. But the pupil contract instead to allow less light to enter eyes. You have more salivation, more digestion, so increased contractions in your stomach and intestines. The lungs would contract because we don't need to breathe as much. Heart rate would decrease. Bile would be released to aid in digestion as well. We don't need glucose being released, so the liver releases less of the glucose stores, and our bladder would contract, meaning you may need to urinate more often because you're not in a state of stress.